The snow was deep, heavy, cold enough to bite through the thin fabric of her coat and settle into the ache in her bones. Every breath came ragged, sharp, clouding in front of her like fleeting smoke as she stumbled over roots, branches scraping her arms, clawing at her legs. She didn't dare look back, but instinct screamed that the shadow was still there, chasing relentless. Her heart thundered in her chest, wild and uncontrollable, and every step she took felt like it carried her closer to the edge of everything she knew, or what was left of it. Pain shot through her side where a branch had struck, blood mixing with the melting snow, sticky and warm against her chilled skin. She wanted to scream, but the sound would carry, and she knew, that whatever pursued her would hear it, would come faster. Her legs pumped, muscles trembling with exhaustion, yet she forced herself forward, driven by that wild, instinctive need to survive. Her mind spun in confusion. Why had they turned on me? The pack she'd called family, the faces she'd trusted, the voices that once guided her, they had exiled her, banished her, labeled her dangerous. And now, here she was, alone, with a power she barely understood thrumming beneath her skin, flaring unpredictably, threatening to betray her at any moment. She felt it coil in her chest, a pulse of silver fire she couldn't control, a heartbeat not entirely her own. The forest around her was merciless. Icy puddles caught her feet and sent her skidding, cracking branches underfoot like gunshots in the silent white. The fog wove between the trees like a living thing, curling and twisting, hiding dangers in its gray embrace. Every sound was magnified: the snap of a twig behind her, the soft crunch of snow, the low growl of a predator, or maybe a pack she could not yet see. She flinched at every shadow, every movement, and yet there was no turning back. She forced her lungs to work, each inhale a jagged scream inside her chest. Her thoughts tumbled over themselves: fear, confusion, anger, despair, each one demanding attention. She hated feeling so small, so exposed, so utterly vulnerable. And yet, despite the terror, there was a spark, a flaring of something ancient, untamed inside her that refused to be extinguished. She wasn't just running. She was alive, even if barely, even if trembling on the edge of collapse. Branches tore at her hair and face. Her fingers scraped along tree bark, leaving faint crimson streaks that froze immediately in the cold. Every nerve ending burned, a symphony of pain and adrenaline. Her ears caught it then, a low, guttural growl not far behind, deep and resonant, vibrating through her chest and rattling her bones. Not human. Not entirely. Her pulse raced even faster, the silver fire inside her flickering, responding to the danger, to the predator, to the chaos she could neither fight nor flee from entirely. And then ahead she saw it, a cabin abandoned, crumbling, half buried in snow and shadow. A flicker of hope sparked in her chest, fragile but insistent. She stumbled forward, knees giving way under exhaustion, snow crunching and slipping beneath her, blood seeping into the white. Every step was agony, every breath a battle, but she pushed herself on, desperate for shelter, for a moment of safety, for anything that would let her catch a single heartbeat without terror screaming in her ears. And she was so close, so close, when the shadow appeared. Not just a shadow, not just a shape, but massive, looming, impossible to ignore. Its presence pressed down on her like a physical weight, fear freezing her mid-step. She could feel its gaze, heavy, assessing, predatory, and a shiver ran through her, not from cold this time but from raw, unfiltered dread. Every instinct screamed to run, yet her legs felt like lead. The silver flame inside her pulsed, rising, a living thing coiling, ready to lash out, to protect, to fight, and she had no idea how to command it. The shadow stepped closer, and for a fleeting heartbeat she thought this was the end. And that's when she heard it. The low, almost playful rumble, deep and commanding, that sent a shiver down her spine. The growl wasn't just warning, it was a promise. It was power. And it was coming for her. Her chest heaved, bloodied and exhausted, yet alive. The snow under her knees was soaked with her own warmth, the cold forgotten in the shock of the presence before her. She barely dared to breathe. One step, one movement, and the shadow would know exactly how afraid she was. She wanted to scream. She wanted to run. She wanted to vanish entirely. But she couldn't. The shadow advanced. Pose, heart racing, breath ragged. And just when her strength threatened to fail, she stumbled into the side of the cabin, collapsing against its frozen wood, praying that it would hold her for even a moment longer. And then, she felt it. Not the wind. Not the cold. Not the snow. Something else. Something alive. Something massive and impossible, filling the clearing with power and presence. Her pulse hammered. Her silver flame flared, reacting alive. And through the terror, through the pain, through the fear, a single thought struck her. This isn't the end. Not yet. If you love forbidden romance and stories that grip your heart, subscribe to Anne's Romance Collections now. Hit the bell so you never miss a tale that burns. And just like that, the shadow lunged forward, impossible and towering, and the screen of snow, night, and fear swallowed her. She barely had time to blink before he stepped out of the shadows. One moment the clearing was silent, frozen in terror. The next he was there, towering, impossibly strong, his presence like gravity pulling everything toward him. His eyes, dark and sharp, cut through the fog and snow, and the weight of his gaze pressed against her chest, made her feel exposed, vulnerable, yet alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. He didn't rush. He didn't lunge or attack. He simply stood there, every muscle tensed, every movement measured, like a predator that knew exactly how much fear he could tolerate from his prey before it shattered. And yet there was something else beneath the hard exterior. A flicker, a hesitation, almost tenderness. A pull she couldn't name, though it stirred something deep inside her chest. "You shouldn't be here," he said, voice low and gravelly, like thunder rolling across frozen mountains. Each word pressed against her ears and her heart, commanding attention. "Yet, I can't leave you." Her body froze. Her mind wanted to run, wanted to vanish, wanted to deny every nerve in her being that urged her forward. But something in the way he spoke, the way his gaze lingered, held her in place. Her pulse thundered, awareness sharpening with every second. She could feel it in the air between them, electric, tense, impossible to ignore. Her own hands trembled, clutching the snow-laden branches, trying to ground herself, to remember why survival meant fleeing, not standing. He knew her name. Not a casual observation, not a whispered rumor. He knew her name like he had carried it with him, spoken it in the darkness when no one else could hear. That knowledge made her skin prickle, made the hair on the back of her neck rise. How much had he watched? How long had he waited in the shadows, witnessing her fear, her desperation, her raw, untamed power? The forest around them seemed to recede, the growls in the distance dimming into something almost irrelevant compared to the intensity between them. Every instinct she had screamed at her to run, to hide, to vanish. But the Alpha's presence, massive, commanding, undeniably dangerous, also made her feel seen. Truly seen in a way no one had since the pack had cast her out. She tried to speak, but words tangled in her throat. Fear and curiosity collided, mingling with something hotter, deeper. A flicker of desire? A hint of connection she shouldn't allow herself to feel yet couldn't ignore. And the Alpha seemed to notice, the slightest softening of his gaze, a shift in his stance, a subtle exhale that wasn't entirely guarded. "You're hurt," he observed, voice softer now, almost reluctant. "Let me." "I don't need your help," she snapped, sharp and brittle, the words tasting like metal in her mouth. She stepped back, brushing snow from her coat, trying to push the magnetic pull of him away, trying to regain control over the chaos inside her chest. Her pulse raced too fast, her muscles twitched with tension. Yet, despite her resistance, she couldn't deny the warmth that spread under her ribs at the sound of his voice, at the weight of his gaze. He didn't argue. He simply stepped closer, careful, measured, not threatening, not yielding. And their hands brushed. Not intentionally, not in a moment of reckless abandon, but in the subtle, accidental way that made the air between them thrum. Electricity sparked where their skin met. And she felt it, knew it, even as she tried to recoil, even as her instincts screamed at her to flee. "You can run," he said, his tone low and steady, carrying a power she could feel in her bones. "But running won't save you. Not entirely. I can protect you. If you let me." Her breath hitched, shallow and frantic. Part of her wanted to flee, to disappear into the snow, to ignore the stirrings of something she had no name for. Part of her wanted to collapse into the safety of his presence, to trust a stranger in a way she hadn't trusted anyone in years. Her heart wavered, caught between terror and longing, between instinct and desire, between self-preservation and a need for connection she barely understood. The Alpha's gaze softened, almost imperceptibly, betraying a fleeting vulnerability behind the layers of command and danger. She noticed it, felt it like a whisper against the storm raging inside her. And she realized with a shiver that wasn't entirely from cold, that he wasn't just a threat. He wasn't just a predator. He was something more. Something that might see the real her, the part of her that had been shattered, exiled, and branded as dangerous. For the first time in days, maybe weeks, she allowed herself to breathe a little slower, to feel the air around her without it tasting like panic. Yet the forest, the snow, the shadows around them reminded her that the danger hadn't vanished. Not even close. He was still bleeding, still hunted, still exiled. And still, despite every warning in her body, despite the fear screaming in her veins, she stayed. Because when she looked at him, truly looked, she felt something that had nothing to do with fear or caution. Something that spoke of protection, power, and a promise she couldn't yet name. Her pulse quickened again, not just from fear, but from the awareness of proximity, from the brush of his hand against hers, from the undeniable force of attraction pulling at the edges of her resolve. She wanted to run, she told herself. She wanted to flee. And yet, the weight of his gaze, the raw intensity in his presence, the unspoken promise lingering in the space between them, made her legs stay rooted, made her chest rise and fall in synchrony with his, made her question whether survival alone was the only path left. "You don't have to answer me now," he said, voice low, a rumble that pressed against her ribs. "But you need to know I will find you. I will protect you. If you let me." The snow swirled around them, the fog creeping closer, curling through the trees like a predator again, but she hardly noticed. The forest faded. The distant growls faded. All that remained was him, towering, commanding, alive in a way that made her pulse pound, her chest ache, her mind spin. And then the thought struck her, sudden and sharp. Can I trust him? It was the question that hung in the frozen air between them, heavier than the snow, heavier than her fear. And even as she contemplated fleeing, even as every instinct screamed at her to vanish into the forest, part of her wanted to step closer. Wanted to reach out. Wanted to risk it. The alpha didn't move, didn't pressure. He simply waited, the tension coiling like a spring in the silence between them, as if he knew that the moment she chose, flight or trust, would change everything. Her chest ached, her muscles trembled, her pulse raced, and the snow whispered around them. And just like that she was torn. Torn between running into the unknown chaos of the forest, and staying with the man whose presence burned through her defenses like fire through ice. The choice was hers. For now. And in that moment, the growls from the forest seemed almost distant, almost insignificant, because the real danger, the real storm, was right in front of her. The Alpha King watching, waiting, unyielding and impossible to ignore. She sank to the frozen earth, snow melting into the dark stains of her blood, and for the first time since she'd fled, the adrenaline began to ebb, leaving raw, aching exhaustion in its place. Every movement throbbed with pain, each breath a reminder that her body had been pushed to its limits. And yet the deeper ache wasn't physical, it was carved into her soul. Exile. Rejection. The pack she had called family, the ones who had once praised her strength, had branded her a threat, a danger they could not control. Their whispers haunted her even now, ghostly voices in her mind. Too dangerous, unpredictable. She will destroy us. The cold pressed against her skin, but it wasn't the winter that made her shiver. It was memory. She remembered the way they had turned away from her, the accusations that stung worse than claws, the eyes that had once been warm now filled with fear and contempt. She remembered hiding her tears behind the thin veil of bravado, telling herself that survival meant suppressing every shred of hurt. And yet, under the weight of the forest, the exhaustion, the snow pressing against her cheeks, the pain was impossible to ignore. She clenched her fists, tasting iron on her tongue, and a flare of that forbidden power surged within her. The silver flame, a gift and a curse, coiled through her veins like liquid light, untamed and furious. It had always been there, whispering in her blood, waiting, flaring unpredictably when she felt strong emotions. Fear, anger, despair. Her pack had called it dangerous. They had called her dangerous. And tonight, as the forest stretched silent around her, she could feel it awake, sensing the alpha nearby, stirring with a life of its own, reacting to the proximity of someone who could match it or maybe even control it. Her mind drifted unwillingly to the first time she had felt that power. She had been a child then, untrained, unguarded, and it had burned through her like a storm she couldn't contain. She had terrified them, terrified herself. Her parents, her mentors, her friends, all of them had recoiled. And now, years later, alone in the forest, hunted, bleeding, she still feared it. Feared that it might betray her at the worst possible moment. Feared that it would mark her as untouchable, untamable, unworthy of connection. And yet he was here. He, the alpha, towering, commanding, dangerous, and somehow patient. He knelt before her, not pressing, not demanding, simply observing with an intensity that made her chest ache. His hands hovered just above her bloodied skin for a heartbeat longer than comfortable, and she flinched, expecting reprimand, expecting disgust, expecting judgment. But it never came. "You're stronger than you know," he murmured, voice low and gravelly, carrying a weight that made the words feel like a lifeline. His fingers brushed against the side of her arm as he tended to a deep scrape, careful, deliberate, leaving her pulse hammering not just from pain, but from the subtle intimacy of the touch. "You don't have to hide it. I can see it. I see all of you." Her breath caught. Those words struck something inside her that had been frozen for years. To be seen, truly seen, without fear, without revulsion, without judgment. It was unfamiliar. Vulnerable. Terrifying. And somehow exhilarating. She wanted to retreat, to curl in on herself and disappear into the shadows of the forest. But she didn't. Not entirely. She stayed, trembling, hesitant, aching but staying. The fire inside her, the silver flame, pulsed in response, coiling and thrumming as if acknowledging his presence, acknowledging his gaze, acknowledging the rare, fragile thread of trust she was daring to offer. She had spent her life hiding, suppressing, running, and now here with him kneeling in the snow, tending to her wounds, she felt that thread stretch, fragile yet undeniable. She remembered the whispered warnings from her past. The council members who had shunned her, the packmates who had whispered behind her back, the alpha who had exiled her without a second thought. Too dangerous. Too unpredictable. She will destroy us. And yet, as she felt his hands steady and sure, tracing the wounds along her arms, she realized that perhaps she had been wrong. Perhaps there were some who could see her power not as a curse but as a gift. Perhaps there were those who could meet her, not with fear but with understanding. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, ragged breaths, each inhalation mixing the cold air with the warmth of something new, hope. A quiet, fragile hope that had nothing to do with safety and everything to do with being seen. The forest around them seemed to shrink, the shadows and fog retreating slightly, as if acknowledging the small, tenuous bond forming in that snow-laden clearing. She tried to speak, to thank him, to articulate the whirl of emotions inside her, but words tangled in her throat. Instead, she allowed herself to meet his gaze, letting the warmth of his attention ground her, anchor her, and for a fleeting heartbeat she felt like more than a hunted omega. He felt like a person. She felt like someone who might survive. Not just the night but the exile, the fear, the world that had turned against her. And even as she considered retreating again, driven by instinct and fear, she couldn't deny the stirrings of something deeper, something dangerous. Her pulse quickened in response to the brush of his fingers against her skin, her chest tightening with a longing she didn't yet dare to name. Every nerve in her body hummed with awareness, of him, of herself, of the power she had been taught to fear, of the bond forming in silence, quiet and tentative, between them. The alpha didn't rush. He didn't speak more than necessary. He simply stayed steady, commanding, patient. He let her breathe, let her process, let her decide whether to allow herself to lean even a little into the connection forming between them. And though her mind screamed at her to run, her body betrayed her, rooting her to the frozen ground. For the first time in weeks, perhaps months, she allowed herself to feel that quiet spark of safety, of recognition, of understanding. She let him tend to her wounds. She let her defenses soften just enough to taste the possibility of trust. And as the snow continued to fall around them, silver and cold against the fire rising inside her, she realized something terrifying and exhilarating at once. She didn't want him to leave. Not yet. And in that fragile, fleeting moment of quiet, amidst the shadows and snow, the lingering fear and the silver flame coiling within her, the first delicate thread of hope was spun. A thread that might, someday, pull her closer to something she had never thought possible. Connection, intimacy, and maybe, just maybe, love. The forest thinned at last, giving way to a hollow carved by time itself. Ancient trees stood sentinel, their gnarled limbs like hands reaching for a sky that barely let the moon shine through. She followed him silently, her breaths visible in the cold night air, mixing with the faint mist curling from the earth. Each step carried both fear and anticipation, and with every heartbeat the pulse of something greater, something ancient, throbbed beneath her skin. She could feel it, faint and insistent, calling her forward, whispering of a destiny she barely dared to imagine. He led her without hesitation, sure-footed, powerful, his presence unwavering. She noticed the subtle tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers flexed as though resisting the pull of her energy, as though he too felt the stirrings of prophecy in the air. He didn't speak, letting the forest fill the silence, letting the snow-laden wind brush against them, letting the cold deepen the intimacy of the shared journey. Yet in that silence she could sense his admiration, fragile and reluctant, interwoven with the shadow of fear. Her power, her uncontrolled, blazing silver flame power, was no longer hidden from him. And he saw it, acknowledged it, and that both terrified and fascinated her. They reached a clearing at the forest's heart, where the earth had been shaped long before humans or wolves walked there. Stone pillars, etched with symbols older than memory, jutted from the ground, encircling a shallow altar carved of rock and roots. The carvings glimmered faintly, as though some unseen light pulsed through them in response to her presence. She stepped closer, her fingers brushing the cold stone, and a jolt of recognition shot through her. She knew these shapes, these symbols, though she had never seen them before. They were in her dreams, in the flickers of fire she sometimes glimpsed when her power surged too violently, in the whispers she had long ignored. "Child of the flame," she whispered, voice trembling, tasting the words like they were both a warning and a promise. Her pulse accelerated, a mix of fear, awe, and reluctant hope spiraling through her veins. She didn't understand fully what it meant, only that the forest, the carvings, the energy had called her here for a reason. She felt it in the marrow of her bones. She belonged somehow to something far larger than herself, something that had been waiting for her, watching her, anticipating her rise. He stepped beside her, close enough for her to feel the warmth radiating from his body, close enough for the subtle brush of his presence to stir her senses. His gaze traced the carvings along the altar, his jaw tightening ever so slightly, his brow furrowed as though trying to measure what she could not yet see. This is why you were hidden," he murmured, voice low, husky, almost reverent. "Why they feared you. Why your power has always been different." She looked at him, startled. Different. Dangerous. Gifted. Cursed. The words he spoke were layered with meaning, weighted with the truth she had been running from all her life. And for a fleeting moment she allowed herself to imagine, no, to feel, what it would be like to stop running, to stop hiding, to stop fearing that her very nature made her a threat to everyone she loved. A sudden gust of wind, or perhaps the stirrings of the forest itself, whipped through the clearing, carrying faint whispers. Voices or echoes of voices, brushing against her ears like silk and steel. Names she had never heard, prophecies she had never known, threads of destiny weaving around her heart, tightening it with anticipation and terror. The carvings shimmered faintly as her hand traced one in particular, a symbol that pulsed beneath her fingertips with recognition, a warm, insistent glow that echoed the silver fire within her. "One with the mark," she murmured, shivering, as if speaking aloud might solidify the impossible truth of it. He watched her, unblinking, captivated, conflicted, awestruck. "It's you," he whispered, voice low but trembling. "You're the one they spoke of. I didn't believe it could be real, but it's you." The weight of his words pressed into her chest and she stumbled back slightly, overwhelmed. She was real, and more than that, she was necessary. The realization made her knees weak, made her stomach twist with doubt, with fear, with longing. Could she rise to meet the expectations of a prophecy she barely understood? Could she wield her power without consuming herself, without destroying those she loved, including the Alpha standing beside her, watching, fearing, longing? The snow beneath her boots shifted, and with it the energy of the clearing pulsed in response. Her silver flames stirred beneath her skin, a whispering promise that she could be more, that she could become more. But the fear lingered. She had spent years hiding, suppressing, surviving. Could she embrace something so much greater than herself without losing control? He stepped closer, the faint scent of him, wood, musk, warmth, curling around her senses. I've never met anyone like you, he admitted, voice almost breaking. Not in 100 years, not in 100 lifetimes. And I don't know if I should fear you or protect you. Maybe both. Her pulse quickened. The vulnerability in his voice, the raw honesty, made her ache in ways she hadn't expected. She had always been told to trust no one, to rely only on herself, to bury the power that set her apart. And yet here he was, alpha, predator, king of his domain, and he was offering understanding, patience, something that hovered between protection and something more. Her fingers brushed against the stone altar again, feeling the carvings hum under her touch. A vision flared, brief, disorienting, bright with silver and gold light. She saw herself standing at the center of an army, not alone, not hunted, not rejected. She saw herself wielding her power with precision and confidence, silver flames dancing along her arms, her eyes alight with unyielding fire. The prophecy, whispered for centuries, spoke of her. She could feel it now. She could feel the truth of it, buried beneath years of fear, shame, and exile. And yet doubt remained. What if she failed? What if her power consumed her, or worse, those she loved? Her chest tightened with the weight of the question, and the alpha sensed it. He stepped closer again, fingers brushing her shoulder with deliberate care, grounding her even as the visions of destiny and power swirled chaotically in her mind. You are not alone, he said, steadying her trembling frame. You never have been. And I will stand with you, through everything. I will not let your power destroy you, or the world around you. Not if I can help it. A quiet hope stirred within her, fragile yet undeniable. For the first time she felt the possibility of accepting herself, not just surviving but becoming. She could be more than the hunted Omega, more than the girl feared for her silver flame. She could be the one called by prophecy, the one who would shape the future. And perhaps, just perhaps, she could let someone see her through it all. Her eyes met his, and in that gaze she saw not only his admiration tinged with awe and fear, but a willingness to fight alongside her, to bear the burden of destiny together. A thread of connection wove between them, fragile but insistent, carrying the weight of unspoken trust, tentative desire, and the promise of something larger than either of them could yet comprehend. The forest around them seemed to pulse with anticipation. The altar, the carvings, the whispers of ancient voices, they all acknowledged her presence, her awakening, her potential. She was no longer just running from fear. She was standing at the threshold of something immense, something impossible to ignore, something that demanded she embrace both her power and the man who had become her anchor in the chaos. And as she drew a deep, shivering breath, the silver flame within her stirred with renewed intensity, matching the rhythm of her heartbeat, the pulse of the forest, and the quiet, steady presence of the alpha at her side. For the first time in her life she allowed herself to believe in the impossible. She was not just the hunted. She was the chosen. She was the flame. She was the one the prophecy had spoken of, and the journey, terrifying and exhilarating, was only just beginning. The forest trembled beneath an approaching storm, not the quiet, shivering cold she had grown accustomed to, but the kind that ripped through the trees and made shadows leap like predators of their own. She felt it first as a pulse against her chest, the instinctive warning that danger was not just near, it was here. Her pulse raced, every nerve flaring, every muscle coiled like a spring ready to snap. She turned, expecting wolves or pack hunters, but what met her eyes was something far worse. A contingent of figures emerging from the tree line, their shapes massive and menacing, eyes glinting with challenge, their growls low and unforgiving. The alpha moved before she could react, his body a shield of raw power, muscles tense, stance commanding. But even his presence couldn't shield her from the social storm crashing in. The whispered accusations, the stares of dissenting alphas who had long resented her existence, the murmured threats of the council who had labeled her a danger long before the prophecy had made her real. You should leave, one voice growled, sharp as ice. A rival alpha stepped forward, teeth bared in challenge, claws scraping the frozen ground. This isn't your place. Your power is unstable. Your presence will bring ruin. She stiffened, silver flames stirring in her veins, responding to the venom and fear radiating from the group. She wanted to speak, to defend herself, but the alpha's hand on her shoulder froze her in place. His eyes, dark and stormy, flicked toward hers, conveying both warning and protection. Listen to me, he murmured low, fierce. This is not the time. Stand with me or... His voice trailed, leaving the threat unspoken, hanging like a blade between them. The confrontation erupted suddenly. Words became shouts, accusations morphed into physical aggression. One of the dissenting wolves lunged, claws catching the bark of a tree as the alpha intercepted, growls deep and resonant, teeth flashing in the dim light. She ducked instinctively, snow scattering beneath her boots, heart pounding like a drum in a storm. The energy around her surged, fear, anger, exhilaration, and with it, a spark of her power flared, silver threads licking along her skin, her senses heightened, her vision sharpened. "You shouldn't be here," someone screamed. And for the first time she felt the truth of it. Her presence was dangerous, unstable, unpredictable. Her pulse matched the chaos around her, and she realized with a shock that made her breath hitch, that she didn't need to control it yet to make an impact. Her silver flame danced along her arms, illuminating the snow in eerie, flickering light. The forest itself seemed to react, branches shivering, shadows twisting, as if aware of the power now fully stirring in her veins. The alpha's voice cut through the chaos, commanding, protective. "She's with me. You forget who I am at your peril." But even as he fought, even as he protected her, the pressure of disapproval, of fear, of the world rejecting her, pressed down like a weight she couldn't escape. Their enemies were relentless, the air thick with tension, claws and teeth flashing, shouts and growls colliding in a deafening crescendo. And then the moment came when it was too much. Words, threats, accusations, all of them shattered the fragile barrier she had built around herself. Panic surged through her, wild and uncontrolled, and her silver flame erupted in a blinding, almost painful glow. She barely recognized herself as she bolted, instinct and power guiding her through the trees, branches whipping at her skin, snow melting into crimson streaks, adrenaline and fear propelling her faster than she had ever run. Behind her, the alpha's voice rang out, calling her name, urgent, commanding, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. The forest blurred into a tangle of white and shadow, the sound of pursuit close behind, the cries of dissenting wolves echoing through the trees like a chorus of judgment. She glimpsed glimpses of her own power manifesting involuntarily, a burst of silver fire flickering along her shoulders, illuminating the fear and awe in the eyes of those who chased her. She ran not just to escape them but to escape the weight of the world, the pressure of prophecy, the judgment of those who could not see her true self. Her heart raced with guilt and exhilaration, terror and defiance intertwined, and she realized in that frantic flight that her power was more than a curse. It was a weapon, a shield, a declaration that she would not be broken. The forest opened briefly, a hollow of twisted trees and snow-laden ground, and she skidded to a halt, chest heaving, mind racing. The distant cries of wolves, far off but growing, pierced the night, and her pulse jumped in response. The sound was haunting, eerie, a prelude to further chaos. She knew instinctively that this was only the beginning. More danger was coming, relentless and unstoppable, and there was nowhere left to hide. Behind her, the alpha's roar cut through the darkness, commanding, protective, defiant. And she felt it, a tether, fragile yet unbroken, connecting them even in the midst of chaos. She wanted to turn back, to throw herself into his arms, to find safety, but pride and fear tangled with something else, something intoxicating. She couldn't stop running. She wouldn't. Not yet. Her silver flame flared again, responding to her fear, her anger, her need to survive, and for a moment, the forest lit in ghostly luminescence, the shadows flickering like spirits awakened. She felt the surge of her full potential, wild and untamed, a force that could not be ignored. And in that instant, as the cries of distant wolves echoed like a prophecy of what was to come, she understood something fundamental. Her journey, her power, her destiny, could not be paused or hidden any longer. She pushed forward into the unknown, heart pounding, senses alive, mind torn between fear and exhilaration, realizing that the world was not ready for her, but she was ready to face it anyway. And somewhere in the distance, a low, haunting howl carried across the forest, chilling and foreboding. The night was far from over. The threat had only begun. And in that howl she recognized it not as a challenge but as a call that demanded everything she had and everything she was yet to become. The forest opened into a small, secluded hollow, cradled by cliffs and ancient trees whose limbs arched like guardians over the space. The snow had melted here just enough to reveal a hidden cave, its entrance veiled by ivy and shadow. She stumbled inside first, exhaustion weighing on every muscle, her breath ragged, her hands trembling. The alpha followed, silent but commanding, his presence a steady anchor she hadn't realized she desperately needed. A fire had been built within the cave, small but fierce, crackling and illuminating the rough stone walls in amber gold light. The warmth hit her immediately, seeping into her bones, and she felt the first sense of safety in what felt like a lifetime. The shadows cast by the flickering flame made the space feel alive, dancing along the walls as though the forest itself had entered, bowing to the stillness and quiet tension that hung between them. He sat across from her, close enough for their knees to almost brush, and she felt a shiver run through her, not from the cold but from the weight of his gaze. Dark, intense, commanding, yet softened by something almost tender. He spoke first, voice low, carrying the timbre of someone who had lived through battles most would never survive. "I've fought," he admitted, each word deliberate, heavy with memory. "Lost more than I care to remember. I've seen friends die, packs crumble, and I've carried scars that no one ever noticed, that no one ever asked about." She listened, captivated by the vulnerability that tempered his strength, the honesty that fractured the mask of the alpha. He was more than a protector, more than a predator. He was someone who had endured pain, and it was this endurance that made her heart ache in a way she hadn't expected. When her turn came, she hesitated. Her secrets were dangerous, unspoken, and yet the firelight made the space intimate, almost sacred. She drew a shivering breath, meeting his gaze. "I've always been told I'm a danger," she confessed. "That my power, my bloodline, it's too much. That I will destroy everything I touch. I've been alone for so long because of it. Afraid of myself, afraid of everyone else." Her words hung in the cave like smoke, curling through the air, invisible yet palpable. He reached out instinctively, a hand hovering near hers, just enough to let her feel the warmth of his skin without breaking her fragile defenses. "I see all of you," he murmured. "Not just the fear, not just the power, not just the danger, but every fragment. The part you hide, the part you wish didn't exist. I see it. And I'm not running." Her breath caught, a heartbeat skipped, and she felt the tug of something dangerous, something that made her pulse race, her senses flare, her skin tingle. She wanted to pull back, to retreat into the familiar solitude of fear, but every fiber of her being whispered that this connection, this understanding, was rare. Necessary. Perhaps even life-saving. The firelight flickered between them, illuminating the tension in their small gestures. The way her fingers twitched near his hand, the way his gaze softened involuntarily when she shivered, the subtle, almost imperceptible lean of his body toward hers. A brush of hands, accidental but electric, sent a ripple of awareness through them both. She swallowed hard, heart hammering, trying to ground herself as the weight of proximity pressed on her chest like both comfort and temptation. "Can I trust you?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper, laden with both fear and longing. Her words trembled in the quiet, echoing off stone and shadow. He didn't hesitate. "You can trust me," he said, steady, unwavering. "I've never met anyone like you, and I could not, let anything harm you. Not while I draw breath. Not while I live." The words hung between them, resonant, intimate, and her pulse quickened further. The cave seemed to shrink, the firelight flickering more fiercely as though echoing the charge between them. Their eyes locked, and in that moment the world beyond the cave, the rival alphas, the dissenting pack members, the dangers lurking just outside, faded into insignificance. A moment passed, delicate and dangerous. Their faces were inches apart, breaths mingling, hearts sinking in a rhythm both frightening and exhilarating. Her instincts screamed to pull away, to retreat into safety, yet the magnetism between them was undeniable. She felt the thrill of proximity, the temptation of surrender, and the panic of vulnerability all colliding at once. And yet, even in this fragile intimacy, danger remained. The alpha's eyes flicked to the cave entrance, nostrils flaring slightly, muscles tensing subtly. His protective instincts had not dulled. "Something's coming," he murmured, voice low, almost imperceptible, but it carried weight, threading tension back into the soft cocoon they had built. "I don't know what, but we're not alone. Stay close. Don't move unless I tell you." Her body stiffened, adrenaline mingling with the rising pulse of emotion. She wanted to argue, to protest, to insist she could handle herself, but deep down she knew he was right. She had never felt safer, yet never more exposed. And in that paradox she found herself trusting him, not just for protection but for something deeper. Something that could survive both fire and frost. The firelight cast long shadows, dancing across the walls and their entwined emotions, and she realized that this was not just a moment of survival, it was a moment of awakening. A bridge between isolation and connection, fear and desire, past scars and future possibilities. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face, careful, deliberate, and she didn't pull back. The warmth of his fingers lingered, imprinting a memory she didn't realize she needed. "I'm not letting you face this alone," he whispered. "No matter what's out there, no matter what comes next. You won't have to." Her lips parted slightly, but she didn't speak. Words would have ruined the fragile intimacy, the unspoken promise that had passed between them. Instead she let her gaze hold his, letting the connection breathe, pulse and hum like the fire itself. Then a faint rustle outside the cave drew both of them to attention. Instinct surged through him, muscles coiled like springs, eyes narrowing, senses expanding. Even in the tender cocoon of their moment, the threat lingered, insistent, unavoidable. He didn't flinch from her gaze, didn't break the quiet connection they had forged, yet every fiber of him was ready, protective, unwavering. She felt the tension settle into her bones, a mixture of fear and exhilaration, knowing they were on the precipice of both danger and desire. And she realized with a shiver that was part anticipation, part terror, that this trust, this connection, was fragile. One wrong move, one misstep, and it could all be lost. Yet she wanted it, needed it. The fire crackled again, sending sparks into the cold air of the cave, illuminating the weight of their unspoken bond. She inhaled, steadying herself, feeling the warmth, the protection, the unspoken promise, and for the first time she allowed herself to imagine a future where she didn't have to run, where she could trust, where her power wasn't a curse but a force that could be wielded alongside someone who understood her completely. Outside, the forest held its breath, shadows creeping closer, the whisper of danger threading through the night. But inside, in the firelight, hearts beat in sync, fragile and electric, tethered by trust and burgeoning desire, poised on the edge of both passion and peril. And as she allowed herself to lean just slightly toward him, just enough to feel the heat of his presence, she knew, no matter what came next, she was no longer entirely alone. The night was waiting. The forest was waiting. And they would face it together, even if the danger outside never truly slept. The moment was sudden, cruel and sharp, a sound that cut through the fragile cocoon they had built. A voice from the trees, loud, deliberate, carrying accusation like a blade. "She is the one. The child of the flame. The one the prophecy warned us about." Her heart stopped. The cave's warmth, the safety, the fragile trust, they all shattered instantly. She turned toward the opening, snow glinting under the moonlight, and saw them. Figures emerging from shadow, their eyes cold, calculating, their movements deliberate, predatory. The pack she had once called family, twisted into something unrecognizable. The council, the ones who had branded her dangerous, had returned, and they had brought reinforcements. Fear, raw and gnawing, clawed at her chest. Her pulse raced, her muscles tensed, yet it was not just fear, it was betrayal. The words of the council, of those who had exiled her, hit harder than any blade. "Her power will destroy us," they chanted, echoing through the hollow like a curse. The forest seemed to listen, wind curling around the cave entrance as though even the trees recoiled. The Alpha rose instantly, a protective shield in human form, his body radiating controlled strength, yet his eyes betrayed the conflict tearing through him. He knew the truth, knew her, had seen the bravery, the fragility, the fire hidden within, but the weight of the pack's judgment pressed upon him like iron. His voice, deep and steady, broke through the chaos. "She is not your enemy," he said, each word deliberate, fighting against both doubt and tradition. "She is mine to protect." But their accusations didn't falter. "Danger," they hissed. "Unstable. Marked. Too powerful. She cannot remain." Their steps advanced, circling, threatening, cutting off the narrow escape routes. Panic flared in her chest, mingling with anger and shame. She had hoped, for a brief, foolish moment, that trust could exist, that safety could be claimed, that her power could be accepted. She had been wrong. Her hands trembled. The silver flame, the forbidden shift, stirred in her veins. Subtle at first, a whisper, a flicker, but undeniable. It responded to her fear, her betrayal, her grief. The air around her shimmered faintly, particles of light dancing like sparks across her skin, hinting at the force she had learned to hide, the strength she had been told would destroy her. "You lied to them," she whispered, voice trembling yet fierce. Not at the council, not at the accusers, but to herself. She had believed in them. Believed she could belong. The hope was a fragile thing, now shattered beneath the weight of deceit and fear. The Alpha's hand hovered near hers, hesitant, as if he feared touching the flame she could barely control. "Run," he urged, voice taut with emotion, the internal war plain in the slight stiffening of his shoulders. "You have to leave. Not because I want you gone, but because you'll be hunted if you stay." And yet she did not move. Instead, a low growl resonated from deep within her, shaking the hollow, vibrating through the frozen earth. Her silver eyes, barely glimpsed before, now shimmered with unrestrained power, reflecting the firelight of the cave and the moon outside. The shadows recoiled as though sensing her awakening, and even the Alpha stepped back slightly, awe mixed with concern evident in his posture. "You will not touch me," she screamed, voice carrying beyond the cave, fracturing the silence of the night. Sparks of light surged from her palms, swirling around her, illuminating her alone in the hollow like a beacon and a warning all at once. The pack froze, their confidence faltering in the face of raw, untamed power. Accusations became stutters, doubt creeping into their hearts as they realized the force they had condemned was not only real but terrifyingly beautiful. The Alpha moved closer, protective, steady, his hand brushing against her arm, not restraining but tethering her to the one presence she could trust. "I told you," he said, quiet but firm, eyes never leaving hers. "I will stand with you. Always." Tears pricked her eyes, part grief, part rage, part relief, and she realized how alone she had truly been before him. Her shoulders shook, trembling with the weight of betrayal, of fear, of unrestrained potential, but also with the stirring of something else. Connection, loyalty, a fragile thread of trust she had never allowed herself to feel. The council did not retreat. The pack members did not falter entirely. Instead they encircled her, voices rising in accusation, voices harsh and unyielding, destroyer, cursed, monster. Each label tore at her, 1,000 tiny cuts compounding into a single immense pain that threatened to undo her. And yet, she did not collapse. She would not. The silver flames surged, responding to her rage, her heartbreak, her sense of abandonment. Her hair seemed to lift slightly as though drawn by the energy, her pulse sinking with the intensity of her own power. Her breaths came in sharp bursts, chest heaving, eyes glowing with a light that was both terrifying and enthralling. The forest seemed to shiver, leaves rustling in patterns too deliberate to be natural. Even the shadows that had threatened her felt her presence, sensed the shift in balance, the awakening of a force that could no longer be ignored. The Alpha's gaze hardened, unwavering, yet tinged with something raw, awe, fear, and the profound realization that this woman, the one who had been running, hiding, doubting herself, was a force to be reckoned with. Not only would he defend her, but he would stand beside her as the storm gathered, as the pack faltered, as destiny clawed its way into the present. And then, just as suddenly as it began, she turned. Not toward him, not toward the fire, but into the night. Her figure blurred with the silver energy spiraling around her, a flash of light and movement that left the Alpha standing in awe and panic. She ran, unrestrained, untethered, leaving footprints of frost and silver sparks in her wake. From the tree-lean, wolf cries erupted, distant but insistent, carrying with them the promise of pursuit, the hunger of enemies closing in. The forest held its breath again, as if acknowledging that the balance had shifted irreversibly. She had unleashed a glimpse of her full strength, a storm too wild to contain, and the night itself seemed to lean closer, hungry to witness what would happen next. The Alpha stayed, hands clenching, every muscle coiled, eyes scanning the horizon, knowing that no matter how far she ran, danger would follow and that he would follow her. Every fiber of him ached with the need to protect, to guide, to be the anchor she had never allowed herself to hold on to before. And in the hollow, the fire sputtered, casting long, wavering shadows, reflecting the fracture between loyalty and fear, trust and betrayal, love and duty. The prophecy hung in the air, twisted and incomplete, whispering that her power was feared, that her destiny was dangerous, and that the night was far from over. Somewhere in the distance, the pack's voices rose again, shadows shifting closer, the hunger of those who sought to control or destroy her undeniable. And yet, even in the chaos, one truth remained. The Alpha would not abandon her, and she would not run forever. But the next move, hers, theirs, would define everything. The cliffhanger pressed against the night like ice. The shadows closed in, the silver flame lingered, the forest seemed to shiver, and the world waited for the storm to fully arrive. The first thing she noticed was the silence. It wasn't the peaceful kind. It was a heavy, oppressive quiet that pressed against her chest, making each breath feel like it could shatter. The ritual site lay ahead, shrouded in fog that clung to the earth like a living thing. Stone pillars, carved with ancient runes, jutted out from the frozen ground, each one humming faintly, resonating with a power that had waited centuries for her awakening. Her feet carried her without thought, driven by something deeper than fear, deeper than instinct, purpose. The silver flame in her veins roared awake, responding to the history buried in the soil beneath her boots, to the whispers of ancestors that had haunted her dreams. She was no longer the trembling Omega fleeing through the forest. She was something else entirely, a force the world had tried to deny, now claiming her rightful place. The Alpha was at her side, every muscle taut, eyes scanning the shadows that lurked at the edge of the ritual ground. He didn't speak because words would have been pointless against the storm rising inside her. His presence was steady, grounding, and yet it only magnified the energy radiating from her. She felt him, felt the loyalty and the fire mirrored in his own shifter blood, a silent promise that they would face this together. From the trees, figures emerged. Opponents, rival alphas, shadow beasts, the council members who had called her cursed. They didn't move cautiously. They surged forward, driven by fear, greed, and the need to control what they could not understand. The ground trembled with their approach, the ancient stones thrumming like a heartbeat in tune with her own. And as they advanced, so too did her awareness of her power. The forbidden shift, the silver flame, the voice of ancestors that could no longer be silenced. She stopped at the center of the circle, gaze fixed on the lead villain, whose eyes shone with arrogance, thinking the Omega would crumble again, thinking the silver flame was a threat easily contained. They didn't see the fire behind her eyes, the strength coiled in her form, the lineage that hummed in her blood. "Not this time," she whispered, voice low but cutting through the fog like a blade. "I am not yours. I am not their sacrifice. I am not afraid." Then she moved, and the world itself seemed to respond. Silver light burst from her body, spilling outward in waves, illuminating the fog, scattering the shadows. Her hair lifted as if caught in a wind that came from nowhere, and her eyes, bright, incandescent, fixed on every threat with unwavering clarity. The ground beneath her cracked, tiny fissures racing out in fractal patterns as the earth recognized the power standing atop it. The Alpha mirrored her stance, his own power flaring. But his role was different now. No longer a protector merely, he was her partner in every sense. Every growl that rose from his throat resonated in her chest, sinking their hearts, their blood, their determination. Together they became an unstoppable force, a pulse of fire and shadow against those who had sought to bind her. The villain laughed, the sound harsh and brittle, thinking this was a show, thinking fear would bend her to his will. But she stepped forward, letting the silver flame ripple across her skin, feeling the ancestral voices stir, guiding her hands, her movements, her choices. The air around her shimmered with raw energy, fracturing in silver arcs, sparks that danced and struck the frozen earth, turning frost to steam. Time seemed to stretch. Every heartbeat became a drumbeat, every breath a command. The Alpha lunged beside her, fangs flashing, claws catching moonlight, his own silver aura weaving into hers. They fought in perfect synchronicity, attack and counter, offense and defense. Her strength flowing outward, irresistible and undeniable, him as steady as a mountain yet fluid as the wind. The enemies fell back, not in surrender but in awe, in fear, because they realized too late that the girl they had mocked and condemned was no mere Omega. She was the fire of her ancestors, the prophecy incarnate, and she had claimed her power. Every spell, every ritual, every attempt to control her shattered against the force she had become. And yet, even in this triumph, she did not feel victorious. The power coursing through her was intoxicating, overwhelming, a storm that demanded control she had only just begun to master. She could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down, the knowledge that every choice, every surge of energy could reshape the world around her for better or worse. The villain raised his weapon, chanting, attempting to summon forces older than the forest itself. But before his words could take hold, her voice rang out, clear, commanding, ancestral. Enough. The air screamed in response, the silver flame exploding outward in a dome of light, bending reality, stirring ancient spirits that had lain dormant. Figures appeared around her, translucent yet powerful, guardians of the old ways, eyes fixed on her as if to say, "This is the one we have waited for." The ground shook violently, tremors rippling out to the far edges of the ritual site, splitting stone and scattering frost. She raised her hands and the energy flowed where she willed it, pushing back the villain, binding his shadows, unraveling the incantation meant to control her. She could feel the alpha beside her, a steady presence, but also sensing the danger escalating, the stakes higher than ever. His hand brushed hers, not by accident but as a tether, a reminder that they were no longer alone in this. For a long, suspended moment, the two of them stood, fire and shadow, strength and loyalty, prophecy and choice, facing a threat that had underestimated them, that had thought power alone could dictate the future. And then, as the dust settled, as the silver light ebbed to a soft glow around her, she realized something profound. She was no longer the hunted. She was no longer fragile. She was the force the world had feared, and she had claimed it. The villain, still standing, recognized defeat in the widening distance between their abilities. Yet he did not retreat fully. The eyes that had once held arrogance now glittered with a dangerous calculation, aware that this was not the end, that power had awakened, that prophecy had begun, and that the true battle was only just beginning. And as the heroine stood, her silver flame reflecting in the alpha's steady gaze, the ritual site trembling with energy, the forest around them alive with ancestral spirits, one truth settled in the air like a tangible presence. She would not be anyone's sacrifice, not now, not ever. The cliffhanger pressed in around them, the villain's eyes still watching, plotting, the ground still trembling, and the night whispering that the storm had only grown stronger. The next move would not be theirs alone, but theirs together. And that unity, that fire, that unstoppable force, was only the beginning. She stood at the edge of the ritual site, silver flame ebbing into a soft, glowing shimmer across her skin. Her chest heaved, each breath a reminder of the battle she had endured, not just with enemies but with herself. The alpha's presence beside her was solid, unwavering, but even he could not fill the hollow ache of uncertainty that gnawed at her heart. The forest around them seemed suspended in silence, as if the trees themselves were holding their collective breath. The enemies had retreated, for now. Yet the shadow of threat lingered, a dark pulse that seemed to beat in time with her own racing heartbeat. Every instinct screamed that the danger was far from over. And in that quiet, almost sacred moment, she felt the weight of the question the universe had thrust upon her. Would they ever accept her? Could she trust anyone outside of the Alpha standing beside her? Her eyes, luminous with the silver glow of her power, scanned the darkness, seeing the ghosts of those who had called her cursed, who had whispered she was too dangerous to exist. She remembered every word of rejection, every pointed finger, every night spent alone in the shadows, doubting herself, questioning her worth. And yet, she had survived. She had risen. The Alpha shifted closer, his hand brushing against hers. Not forceful, not demanding, just there. His gaze held her in a way that stripped away the mask she had worn for so long, revealing the fragile, fierce core beneath. He didn't speak, words weren't needed. His presence alone was a question, a challenge, and a promise all at once. And that was when it hit her. The realization that her fight was not just about power or prophecy or vengeance. It was about choice. About trust. About who she would allow to walk beside her in a world that had tried to crush her at every turn. Would she choose to trust those who feared her? Could she believe that the Alpha, scarred and complicated as he was, would never betray her? Or would she retreat again, folding into the shadows, letting the world win by default? Her thoughts were interrupted by the faintest sound, the whisper of movement at the forest's edge, the twitch of a branch, the echo of a distant howl. It was a reminder that the world did not pause for reflection, that danger and destiny were entwined, and that every choice carried consequences heavier than any burden she had borne before. "Would you have chosen me, or feared me?" she asked the night, not out loud, but in the trembling, almost imperceptible voice of her heart. Her pulse seemed to echo in the stillness, each beat a drum of vulnerability and courage entwined. The question hung in the air like smoke curling around the trees, reaching out to any who might be watching or listening, with the weight of life and death intertwined. And then, softly, almost imperceptibly, the alpha leaned closer, his voice a low, steady rumble that carried more certainty than any words could have conveyed. "I see you, all of you." Those words were a lifeline, a tether between their souls, a promise that even in the chaos, even in the storm of uncertainty and fear, there was someone who would stand with her, not against her. But the moment was fleeting. The world beyond the ritual site was not quiet, not calm. The shadows had not vanished. They had only receded, waiting, watching, coiling like predators poised to strike. And in that tense pause, as the silver glow of her power mingled with the fading twilight, a haunting truth pressed in. The story was far from over. Every choice, every flicker of trust, every heartbeat in her chest was a step along a path she could not yet see the end of. And so she stood there, radiant and fragile, powerful and vulnerable, facing a horizon that trembled with possibility and danger. Her eyes lifted to the darkened tree-line, knowing that her enemies, her destiny, and her heart were all converging in a way that would demand everything from her. Would she fight alone, or would she let the alpha walk beside her? Would she embrace the fire within or let it burn in silence, unseen? The air seemed to pause, holding its breath, and the world leaned closer, waiting for her choice. And then, with a quiet, unwavering conviction that radiated from her very bones, she turned to the camera, to the listener, to the one willing to witness her story, and a thought echoed like a bell in the night. If her fire lit something inside you, subscribe to Anne's Romance Collections. Here, every story burns in your heart. The words hung in the air like embers, glowing, smoldering, refusing to die. And just when it felt as if the world might breathe again, a movement in the shadows reminded all who listened that nothing was truly over. The ground shivered faintly beneath her feet, a whisper of the battles yet to come, a murmur of dangers unseen, and a soft, chilling voice seemed to rise from the darkness. "She is not the only one." The story paused there, on the knife edge of anticipation, heartbeats mingling with the rustling leaves, with the distant howl, with the promise that the next chapter would test her in ways unimaginable. The tension lingered, thick and palpable, leaving the listener suspended between fear and hope, wonder and dread. And in that suspended moment, one truth remained undeniable. She had survived, she had claimed her power, and now the choice was theirs. Would they stand with her, or would they let fear dictate the next move? The forest lay hushed, but it was no ordinary silence. Every snow-laden branch trembled faintly, every shadow seemed to curl toward them like fingers of anticipation. She walked side by side with the alpha, their steps leaving prints in the half-frozen ground, each mark a testament to battles survived and battles yet to come. Her chest rose and fell steadily now, the storm of emotion finally finding a rhythm, though her pulse still held that lingering spark of fear and exhilaration. The twilight wrapped around them like a cloak, pale light scattering through bare trees, painting everything in shades of silver and shadow. The air was thick with possibility. Her silver flame pulsed softly along her veins, faint at first, almost hesitant but unmistakable. It was a heartbeat she could feel, a warning and a promise at once. The alpha's hand brushed hers, not by accident but in silent solidarity, grounding her as the unseen tremors beneath their feet spoke of forces awakening long before their time. Her eyes scanned the forest, catching glimpses of movement too subtle for anyone else to notice. The faint quiver of leaves, the ripple of shadows. Something ancient stirred. Something that had been waiting, watching, biding its time while the world above continued, ignorant of the power lying beneath the snow, beneath the earth. And then came the voice. Low, almost whispering, yet it carried through the trees like a living thing. Not a human voice, not entirely. It was layered, echoing with the resonance of 1,000 unseen beings. "She is not the only one," it murmured. The words clung to the air, curling around her heart like smoke, a warning and a call that she could neither ignore nor fully understand. The Alpha stiffened beside her, his instincts already reaching out, tracing the threads of power that swirled like fog in the air. He did not speak. He simply tightened his hand around hers, a silent promise. Whatever came, they would face it together. Yet even as she felt the reassurance, she knew the shadow of danger was no longer a distant threat. It was near. It was patient. And it was hungry. Her silver flame pulsed brighter then, stronger than it had ever been, illuminating her from within. It was a beacon, a declaration, a spark that the world, and the forces lurking just beyond, could not ignore. Each pulse resonated with her heartbeat, with her will, with the undeniable truth that she had survived everything thrown at her and would survive what was yet to come. The forest seemed alive now. Branches groaned as if sighing under the weight of expectation, snow shifted with the pressure of unseen presences, and the ground beneath their feet quivered faintly, like the heartbeat of the earth itself responding to hers. She could feel it, threads of destiny weaving together, pulling her toward a future she had yet to see, toward challenges that would demand more than courage alone. A shiver ran through her spine as another whisper brushed the edges of her mind. The true Alpha hasn't risen, yet. It was not a threat, it was a prophecy. A challenge. And though the words were carried on the cold evening air, they sank deep into her chest, stirring the embers of ambition, fear, and determination all at once. She tightened her grip on the Alpha's hand, letting the warmth anchor her in the moment, even as the shadows beyond hinted at trials she could not yet imagine. She did not speak, but the fire in her eyes answered the forest, the earth, the unseen forces watching. She was ready. She had survived exile, betrayal, and heartbreak. She had claimed her power, her voice, her destiny. And she would not cower. The Alpha's gaze met hers, steady, unwavering, a mirror of respect and understanding. He did not question, did not doubt. He simply acknowledged the truth in her, the force that would change the balance of the world. And though they walked in silence, their hearts spoke volumes. Together they would face what came next, but they knew it would not be the end. Not yet. The snow underfoot shifted once more, a tremor that vibrated through their bones. The trees seemed to lean closer as though trying to glimpse what lay ahead. And somewhere in the distance a low, resonant growl rumbled, not close, not threatening just yet, but unmistakable. A reminder that the forces she had begun to understand were awake now, stirring, aligning, watching. She inhaled sharply, feeling the silver flame surge again, her inner power thrumming like a drum of destiny. The forest held its breath with her. The Alpha's hand tightened around hers in response, a tether of trust in a world poised on the edge of chaos. And she knew with every fiber of her being that the story was far from over. The shadows thickened, folding around the edges of their vision, whispering secrets she could almost hear if she listened closely enough. Something, or someone, waited for the right moment to step forward. And she would be ready. She would not just survive, she would rise. The last light of the day faded into the horizon, leaving the forest cloaked in silver and shadow. Her silver flame pulsed once more, brighter than ever, as if answering the silent call of the unseen, the unspoken, the unfinished. The Alpha glanced at her, then forward, understanding without words that the night held more than darkness. It held challenge, revelation, and the next chapter of a story still being written. And there, standing at the edge of twilight, she made a silent vow, to herself, to the Alpha, and to the world that would soon witness her rise. She would face everything coming and she would not falter. Not now. Not ever. The forest whispered, the ground trembled faintly beneath their feet, and the silver flame danced, alive with anticipation. Something ancient, powerful, and unseen was awakening, and as the camera, or the listener, lingered on the pair stepping into the unknown, the thought remained heavy and undeniable. This is only the beginning. The night pressed close, shadows stretching and twisting, a promise of trials, secrets, and destiny yet to be fulfilled. And in that pregnant pause, in the lingering glow of her inner flame, every listener could feel it. The pull of the next story, the heartbeat of the next battle, the undeniable truth that the world of Anne's romance collections had only just begun to reveal its secrets.